Can these tiles really show us the history of the house? Let's find out. In the next few days, most of my work is going to be up here in the rooms behind me. And that's because I'm going to be taking out the floor tiles from all of these rooms, continuing the work that I started in this room in my last video. Except this time I'm going to be cleaning all the tiles and then taking them outside to stack them up. One thing I have got to work out is what's going to be the easiest way to take hundreds of tiles down the stairs. But one thing I do know is that lifting out these tiles without breaking them is a real challenge. And I'll be doing my best to preserve as many of these tiles as I possibly can. Considering the amount of work that this is going to take, you might well ask, why on earth am I doing it? And there are some pretty good reasons for doing it. One of which is that not all of these rooms will have a tile finish in the future. And the next really important reason is that when the house was built, to create a level surface above the vaults below, they filled these floors with rubble and all sorts of material, which I now need to take out and replace with a more sustainable and lighter option. And another reason I'm going to need to take that material out is that I am going to have to put a bunch of plumbing pipes and cabling underneath the floor in a number of these rooms. And a final reason relates to the vaults below each of these rooms. Because for each of the vaults, I'm going to be needing to take off all the material above, checking the quality of the vault, and then almost certainly having to add a thin layer of reinforced concrete to make sure that they're strong enough for the future. So although it's going to be pretty hard work, it's an important job that I've got to get done. However, before I lift out all of the tiles, there's an interesting story that their layout and their pattern can tell. And to tell that story, I'm going to put on my tile investigation clothes. I'm hoping that my tile investigation clothes make me look more like a budding house historian rather than a wannabe builder. And I hope they'll make me slightly easier to see as I investigate the clues hidden in the tiles. After I took the plaster off all of these walls, the tiles are now the last clue as to the different layout that all of these rooms used to have. For example, in this room, it wasn't always one open space. There used to actually be a small room here, a second small room here, and a passageway connecting the door to them. And the only way you can tell that now is from the patterns of the tiles on the floor. Taking a look at this section here, you can see that the herringbone design of this section suddenly stops with a line of tiles here, a line of tiles here, and a line of what's probably now cement through the middle. And this used to be an old partition wall. So in the past, one would have walked into this space and it would have been a passageway with a wall, and then there was an opening, perhaps with a door or not, into the other area here. And then from this space here, you would then have access into this second room or space here. I'm not sure there would have been a wall all the way up because the markings here and here do not extend all the way across. But perhaps it was like an archway, and definitely there used to be a separate ceiling on this section because there used to be a different line here and a different line here. I don't know what this second space would have been used for. There's no real evidence of it having been a bathroom or a washroom, so perhaps it was a separate bedroom space. What I do know is that the whole of this area would have been a lot darker, not least because each of the different sections had its own false vaulted ceiling, and therefore it would have felt a lot lower and the light wouldn't have come through here at all. That's the end of the first part of my tile investigation by the house historian. I will come back to the other rooms later on, but for now I'm going to get my builder's clothes back on and get on with the work. made a pretty good start at clearing up this section. Most of the tiles are lifting out okay without breaking, which is good news. Some are coming out with a lot of material. Some are coming out with not very much on them, which will make life a lot easier. I've also now pretty much taken away any of the evidence and clues that there was ever a partition wall here. And I'll move on now, clear out this old passageway, and then see how we progress. I finished off lifting up all the tiles in here yesterday, and I'm tempted to carry on in here and clean the tiles, but I think that'll be easier to do and there's a bit more light in here, so I'm going to start the work in the room next door, which, as you can see, is a good deal brighter at the moment. Before I start the work, here's a bit about the pattern of the tiles in this room and the way in which this space might once have been organized. In this room, you have something similar where it would have once been divided at this T-junction point where there would have been a partition wall here, a small bit of wall here, and then 3 separate rooms. Because of the window in the corner here, I suspect that this small space was probably once a bathroom of some sort, which would have left plenty of room for a bedroom in either this or this space. And then here are some photos of the walls before I took the plaster off that clearly show that there were different separate spaces or different separate rooms in this area. There were quite a few broken tiles, but I've managed to lift up the vast majority without breaking them. Quite a lot of them have come off with a lot of material on them, 1 or 2 pretty clean parts. Now I've got to get on with trying to clean them before taking them out. And so the old scraper is going back into action, and I think the dust factor is about to rise quite considerably. With this latest batch, I reckon I'm just over halfway in this room, where I've enjoyed working this morning, especially with the occasional glimpse out the window at the view. But now that it's a little lighter next door, I'm going to head in there and start clearing the tiles in there. The tiles in this room were some of the easier ones to clean, but as you can see from the clip coming up, each tile still took about 30 seconds to clean up. Woohoo! Phew. That is the end of a long, hard, very dusty day. But I'm super pleased that I've finished off the first room, done half of the second room, and built up a pretty substantial pile of clean tiles for use in the future. I've pushed pretty hard today, so I need to rest up a little bit, and then I'll be back on it tomorrow to crack on with the rest of the tiles on that floor. This morning I'm back in the second room to finish off scraping and taking out the tiles left in here. A lot of the material now on the floor came off the tiles when I was knocking it off and then scraping it off. So to finish off in here and tidy up a little bit, I'm just going to pick up the larger parts and then just smooth it over a bit. It was starting to get seriously dusty in there to the extent that I couldn't see very much, so I'm not quite sure what would be showing up on camera. So I'm going to leave it for now, move on to the next room, work on some of the tiles on the floor, and maybe come back into here later. But before I start work in the next room, here's a little bit of history about the tiles in this room and the next one, and the history that they show. This room here doesn't have any particular change in the patterns on the floor, apart from in that corner where I know there was a partition wall separating the staircase from the room. So I think this room was always used for access to the different rooms. On the other side of this wall is now one long open space, and therefore it's a bit strange that they have these three separate doorways. But as you'll see in a minute when we go into that room, it wasn't always one big open space. For instance, in this space, you can see another of those cement type lines running through here. And it suggests, as was backed up by what was the shape of the plaster on these different walls, that this would have been a single room on its own, and that also this next section, where I cleared the tiles off the other day, would have been a second completely separate room, and likewise at the far end, the third part would have been another third separate room. The tiles I was cleaning here were the ones I had lifted up last week, and they were some of the harder ones to clean. I think they had probably been put in later than the other tiles, and maybe a different type of cement or mortar had been used. Whatever it was, I had to start using some more aggressive cleaning tactics to get the material off. Cleaning up those tiles was a seriously tough challenge. They had a lot of material on it, and the material was stuck very tight onto the tiles. So it took a long time, and as you saw, I had to adopt a couple of different techniques just to try and get any of the material off. But I did manage to save the vast majority of the tiles, so progress was at least made. For the rest of the day, I'm gonna work hard to try and lift off all of these tiles in this section here. These tiles were also much more difficult to lift out, and they were coming off with a lot of material. During a lot of this work, I was asking myself why I was spending so much time trying to rescue these tiles rather than just throwing them out. And the answer each time was that it just felt like the right thing to be doing. So I've now finished lifting up the tiles in this section, apart from a couple of rows against that wall, which I'll actually be leaving there. And that's the end of a fairly long and another very dusty day. But I'll be back tomorrow to tidy up this space and see how many of these tiles, a lot of which have got a lot of material on, how many of them I can restore and stack up outside. This morning I'm back in this room to try and save as many of the tiles on the floor as possible, and then to tidy up the surface a little bit. Not surprisingly, these tiles were difficult to clean, especially this brute, which once I started, I decided I had to finish. Job done for this room at least. This is the last batch of tiles from this space, and I'm going to take these down, stack them up outside, and then come back up and do a little bit of a tidy up here. As you can see, this stack has grown quite considerably this week. There are now, I think, about 33, 34 layers of tiles, which is just under 800 tiles. So I calculate that I've brought the wheelbarrow out here about 30 times, and I reckon I've probably been up and down those stairs about 100 times. It's a lot of work. There's plenty more dirt and rubble that I need to clear out of this room, but the tiles and the clues that they had about the history of the house and the layout of this space, they've now gone, just as they have from this room and this room as well. But there are still tiles in this room that I need to clear out, and I'll be coming back next week to get on with that task. And there'll be a lot more trips to the window like this one. I thought this pile of rubble, which has grown considerably in the last few days, would be a fitting place to end the video. Because while there are a lot of broken tiles in this pile, if I'd taken the easy option with the task this week, this pile would be a lot bigger with 800 other broken tiles rather than 800 tiles stacked up at the back. So while these tiles will no longer be able to tell us the history of the layout of the rooms upstairs through their patterns on the floor, when I restore them and reuse them, they will be part of the living history of the house long into the future.